They called black people the N-word. Today, people are standing on nearly every beach in America without thinking about it. But in the 1800s, this wasn't the case. Black people were locked out of many of these areas. They weren't wanted there. They were pushed away, excluded, and made to feel inferior. But something happened. Instead of allowing that exclusion to make them hide or shrink, black people reclaimed the name that had been used against them and turned it into a source of power. Inkwell. What had been used as a slur became the name of a place, a refuge, and eventually a symbol of black pride and community. The Inkwell at Oak Bluffs on Martha's Vineyard became something far greater than a small area of beach. It became a place where black families could gather, rest, swim, celebrate, and simply exist without having to justify their presence. By the early 1900s, a thriving black community had started to form around Oak Bluffs. Black people weren't simply renting rooms or visiting for a few hours. They began establishing businesses and owning property. In 1912, Henrietta Shearer transformed her laundry business into Shearer Cottage, one of the first black-owned inns on Martha's Vineyard. Shearer Cottage wasn't simply a business. It became a sanctuary. It welcomed black travelers who were denied accommodation elsewhere and became an important gathering place for African-American intellectuals, artists, and public figures. People such as Paul Robeson, Madam C.J. Walker, members of the Harlem Renaissance, and other prominent figures came to Martha's Vineyard. But this story wasn't only about celebrities. It was about ordinary black families. It was about community documentation, family gatherings, and traditions that were passed from one generation to another. Every August, families returned. Children grew up coming here. Parents brought their children. And eventually, those children brought their own children. Through this generational tradition, the Inkwell became more than a vacation destination. It became inheritance. It became inheritance. It became memory. It became identity. And in 1946, another tradition took on a powerful meaning. Black workers and residents would enter the Atlantic Ocean together at dawn. According to the tradition, men and women went into the water together. Today, that tradition continues every summer. Every 4th of July, people gather at the beach early in the morning, around 7 a.m., and enter the water together. For the women and men participating, swimming isn't simply recreation. It's resistance. It's an action. It's a statement about ownership of their own bodies and their right to occupy a space from which black people had once been excluded. The symbolism transformed the Inkwell into an intergenerational space, a place where memory, resistance, family, and freedom could coexist. And that is part of what makes Oak Bluffs so important. Today, Martha's Vineyard is often associated with celebrities, wealthy vacationers, and prominent black intellectuals. But beneath that image is a much more profound story. A story about wealth, a story about ownership, a story about what ownership meant to black people at a time when they were denied access to property, businesses, and opportunity in much of America. Black families bought homes. They established businesses. They opened restaurants, inns, boutiques, and other enterprises. They created spaces where their own community could thrive. And those investments were passed through generations. That is why the story isn't simply about having a choice of where to vacation. It's about what happens when a community is able to invest in itself. But today, there is another challenge. Many people look at Martha's Vineyard and see expensive houses, wealthy visitors, and exclusive property. What they may not realize is that some of those properties represent generations of black ownership, property that families fought to establish, property that parents passed to their children, property connected to a community that was created because black Americans had once been excluded from other places. So the question becomes, how do we ensure that this legacy isn't lost? How do we make sure that the Inkwell doesn't become simply another expensive beach community disconnected from the people who built its cultural meaning? For generations, black residents survived by buying, investing in, and supporting one another. Another? That wasn't simply commerce. It was community preservation. It was resistance. And today, as gentrification and rising property values reshape places like Oak Bluffs, younger generations face another question. What does it mean to inherit this community? Is inheritance simply receiving property? Or does inheritance also mean understanding why that property mattered in the first place? Because legacy isn't just something that can be commodified. Legacy carries memory. It carries sacrifice. It carries the experience of people who were once told that they didn't belong. People who were excluded from beaches. People whose presence was questioned. People whose value was questioned. And yet those same people built something for themselves. They created a place where Black families could gather, a place where Black businesses could thrive, a place where Black children could grow up seeing ownership, community, and possibility. That is why the Inkwell matters. It isn't simply a beach. It isn't simply Martha's Vineyard. And it isn't simply a story about the past. It's about the people who transformed exclusion into community. That is the legacy of the Inkwell. And that legacy is still alive.